The Sovereign Concordance had a word for what was about to happen at the world humans called Meridian Reach, and the word was ceremony. Not battle, not siege, ceremony. For 11,000 years, the Concordance had folded species into itself the same way, and the pattern had become so reliable that the imperial staff colleges taught it as arithmetic rather than art. A fleet arrived. It arranged itself in the great crescent that every civilized eye in the galaxy recognized. It broadcast the second declaration in 900 languages. And then it waited, with the serene patience of an empire that had never once been made to wait in vain, for the smaller thing beneath it to understand that resistance was not merely unwise but grammatically impossible, a sentence that could not be spoken because the language itself forbade it. High Regent Vael Osorai commanded the arrival at Meridian Reach, and he commanded it from the flag deck of the dreadnought Undimmed Ascension, a vessel 11 kilometers along its keel and so old that its first commander had been dust before humanity learned to smelt iron. He was of the Sovereign line, a species of tall, slow, silver-eyed beings whose lifespans ran to 9 centuries, and whose temperament had been sanded smooth by all that time into something that resembled, to shorter-lived races, a kind of divine boredom. Vael had accepted 81 surrenders in his career. He had never accepted a battle. He did not expect to begin today. Below him, filling the great curved viewport of the flag deck, hung the human colony. Meridian Reach was a young world by galactic standards, settled by humans only 90 of their years earlier, a blue-green marble wrapped in thin cloud, ringed by orbital farms and the glittering, untidy sprawl of habitats that humans always seem to build faster than any survey recommended. 300 million of them lived down there. From orbit, their cities were freckles of light on the night side, and their defense fleet, such as it was, had gathered into a loose knot above the northern pole, 17 vessels, none of them larger than a Concordance escort, arranged with what Vael's tactical officers described, not unkindly, as enthusiasm. "They have not dispersed," reported the second voice, an officer of the Delith caste whose 4 arms folded and unfolded in the idle rhythm of a being with nothing pressing to do. "Nor have they fled. The pattern suggests they intend to negotiate terms." "Of course they intend to negotiate," Vael said. "Everyone intends to negotiate. That is what the ceremony is for. It gives them the dignity of believing they chose the inevitable." The second voice inclined its narrow head. This was doctrine, and doctrine was comfortable. The Sovereign Concordance was not a cruel empire. This was a point its own citizens made often and its historians made constantly, and it was, by the peculiar arithmetic of empires, true. The Concordance did not exterminate. It did not enslave in the crude sense that lesser conquerors had. It absorbed. A world that accepted the Second Declaration kept its cities, its languages, its gods, its foods. It surrendered only 3 things: its fleets, its borders, and the right to say no. In exchange, it received 11,000 years of accumulated peace, medicine that erased plagues, trade that erased famines, and a place, a genuine place, with representation, with courts, with a voice, in the largest and oldest civilization the galaxy had ever assembled. 99 of every 100 worlds the Concordance approached said yes within a single rotation. The 100th said yes within a week, after a demonstration that was always the same. A single moon, uninhabited, chosen for the purpose, unmade in a silent flower of light so that the population could watch what mercy had spared them from. It was, Vael believed, the most humane arrangement power had ever devised. He believed it the way he believed in the length of his own arm. The humans had been contacted 40 years earlier, during the first survey of this arm of the spiral. They were young, loud, fractious, technologically adolescent, and this was noted in every report, strange in a way that survey xenologists found difficult to quantify and therefore tended to underweight. They did not organize themselves into a single hierarchy. They fought each other, constantly and pettily, and then bled for each other without apparent logic. They grieved their dead in numbers the Concordance found frankly excessive, and they had a concept, poorly translatable, that recurred in their literature and their law and their private speech with a frequency that unsettled the analysts assigned to them. A thing they called the line, not a border, not a treaty. Something more like a place in the soul past which a human would not be moved, could not be moved, and would spend everything they had, every life, every ship, every future, rather than step back from. The analysts had written papers about it. The papers had been filed. Filing was what the Concordance did with things it did not understand. Vael had read exactly one of those papers decades ago and remembered exactly one sentence from it. They do not calculate the cost of the line. They pay it. He had thought at the time that this was the sentimentality of a young species that had not yet met a cost large enough to teach it arithmetic. He was about to learn that the sentence had not been sentimental. It had been a warning, filed under the wrong heading. 7 light minutes away, aboard the human frigate Adamant Dawn, Commander Elara Voss was 29 years old and had not slept in 31 hours, and both of these facts were about to matter more than anyone in the Concordance could imagine. She was young for the chair she sat in, and she knew it, and she had made a private peace with knowing it. The Terran Colonial Defense Force was young the way all of Meridian Reach was young. The colony had been founded within living memory, its institutions built in a hurry by people who had crossed the dark on the strength of a promise, and it had never had time to grow the slow crust of seniority that older navies wore like armor. Elara had made commander at 27 because the officers ahead of her had either transferred corpsward or aged out, or, in 2 cases, died in the survey accidents that a frontier collected the way old coats collected dust. She commanded the Adamant Dawn, and by the accident of who was present and who was senior, she commanded the 17 ships gathered above the pole, because Rear Admiral Cho had been aboard the medical transport that broke down near the 3rd moon and would not reach the fleet for another 9 hours. 9 hours. Elara had done the math 4 times, hoping it would change. It did not change. For 9 hours, the defense of 300 million people belonged to her. She stood at the center of the Adamant Dawn's bridge, a cramped, warm human space, all worn handholds and coffee-stained consoles and photographs, taped where regulations said photographs should not be taped. And she watched the thing that had come to take her world fill the tactical display like a rising tide. The undimmed ascension was so large that the display could not render it, and the 17 human ships at the same scale without turning the humans into a scatter of dust motes beside a mountain. Her censor chief, a broad, quiet man named Okonkwo, had tried 3 different projections, and finally settled on one that simply put the dreadnought's silhouette along the top of the screen like a horizon, because that was what it was. A horizon, the edge of the possible. "Signals repeating," said her communications officer, Petty Officer Reyes, who was 22 and trying very hard to sound as though 11-kilometer warships arrived above her home every day. Same as the last 4 times. They're calling it the 2nd declaration. It's Commander, it's polite. That's the part I can't get past. It's really polite. Read me the operative line again. Reyes swallowed. Upon receipt of this declaration, the assembled vessels of your world are instructed to power down their weapons, transmit their command codes, and await boarding. Compliance within 1 rotation guarantees the full protection and privilege of concordant citizenship. Non-compliance requires demonstration. She looked up. There's a footnote on demonstration. It links to it's a list, ma'am, of moons. The bridge went quiet in the particular way. A room goes quiet when everyone in it has read the same list. Elara had read it. They had all read it in the 2 hours since the Concordance fleet had dropped out of transit at the system edge and begun its slow, unhurried fall inward. The list was the demonstration record. 840 entries spanning 11,000 years, each one a moon or an asteroid or, in 9 cases, an evacuated colony world, unmade to persuade a population that saying no was a category error. The list was not a threat. That was the thing that had put a cold weight in Elara's stomach and left it there. A threat was made by someone who might be bluffing. The list was a resume. It was made by someone who had never had to bluff in their life. She thought about her mother, who had come to Meridian Reach on the 4th colony ship with a hydroponic certification and a dead husband and a 9-year-old daughter, and who ran a farm on the equatorial plateau that fed 2,000 people, and who had told Elara, the last time they spoke, that the tomatoes were coming in early this year, and she should come home and see them before they were gone. She thought about the line. Everyone raised on the frontier knew the line. You did not talk about it much because talking cheapened it, but it was in you, put there by the stories your grandparents told about why they'd left the crowded coreward worlds in the first place, put there by the plaque at the base of the colony's first landing spire that said, in letters a meter high, "We came here to be no one subject." 300 million people were down there, and the empire above her had a list, and the list had never had a 950th entry, and every fiber of 11,000 years of galactic history said that Meridian Reach was about to become one. "Commander," said Okonkwo quietly from the sensor station, "the fleet's still on approach vector, but it's slowing. They're taking the ceremonial line, textbook. They're going to sit at high orbit and wait for us to power down." He turned. He was older than her by 15 years and had served in the coreward navies before he came home, and he had seen more than anyone else on the bridge, and when he looked at her his face had no answer in it, only the question. "They think we're going to fold, ma'am. The whole approach is built around it. They're not even in a combat posture. They're in a, I don't have another word for it. They're in a receiving posture. Like a host waiting for guests to arrive and take their coats off." Elara looked at the horizon on her screen. The receiving posture, the certainty of it. 11,000 years of 100 worlds out of 100, and the 100th only a week behind. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Before they expect an answer." "One rotation, 20 hours roughly by their reckoning, but the posture says they expect it a lot sooner. They expect us to break the moment we understand there's no version of this fight we win." "And is there?" she asked, because she was 29 and she was in the chair and she would not lie to her own bridge. "A version we win, straight, Chief." Okonkwo held her eyes. "No, ma'am, not the way they mean win. 17 ships against that, we don't have the tonnage to scratch its paint before it unmakes us. If this is about who's left standing at the end, we already lost. 2 hours ago, before they arrived." The bridge was silent. Somewhere a cooling fan ticked. "All right," Elara said. "Then it's not going to be about that." She did not know yet, standing there, exactly what it was going to be about. She only knew, the way you know the shape of a room in the dark, that the empire above her had made a single assumption, and had built its entire 11,000-year machine on top of that assumption, and had never in all that time been forced to check whether the assumption was true. The assumption was that everyone, eventually, when the cost was made large enough, would step back from the line. Elara Voss was about to inform them, on behalf of 300 million people, and her mother's early tomatoes and a plaque a meter high, that this was not correct. But not yet. First she had to make sure she was right about what her people were. So she did the thing the Concordance would never have thought to do, the thing that was not in any of their 840 precedents, because it had never mattered before. She opened a channel to every ship in her ragtag fleet, and to the planet below, and she asked, "This is Commander Voss, Adamant Dawn, acting fleet command." Her voice went out to 17 bridges, and though she did not fully intend it, to a planet's emergency network, so that farmers and dockworkers and schoolteachers and her own mother on the equatorial plateau heard a 29-year-old woman they had never met begin to speak with the strange steadiness of someone who has stopped being afraid because fear has become beside the point. "You've all read the declaration. You've all seen the list." I'm not going to stand here and tell you it's a bluff, because it isn't. I've looked at the same numbers Chief Okonkwo has looked at, and I'll tell you plainly. If this comes to a straight fight over who is left standing, we lose, and we lose badly, and it does not take long. She let that sit. She had learned, young, that people could carry a hard truth if you handed it to them honestly, and dropped it on them if you didn't. So I'm not going to ask you to win. I can't promise you that, and I won't lie to you. What I'm going to ask is different, and every one of you gets to answer it for yourself, because I don't have the right to spend your lives on a certainty I haven't earned. Below her, on the equatorial plateau, a woman with dirt on her hands stood up in a greenhouse full of early tomatoes and turned toward the small radio she kept on the potting bench, because she knew that voice. That fleet came here certain, Elara said. You can feel it in how they're sitting. They're not braced for a fight. They're braced for us to hand them the keys, because in 11,000 years everyone always has. They have a list of 840 worlds that all did the arithmetic and stepped back. And they think we're number 841. And they think it so completely that they've forgotten it's a thing they think, and not a law of the universe. Her hands were steady on the rail. She noticed that with a distant surprise. I don't know if we can save the planet. I'm going to try with everything I've got, and I've got more than they think. But I know one thing for certain, and I'll say it once. There is a line. My grandparents crossed the dark to stand on the far side of it. There's a plaque at the landing spire about it. And an empire that has never once had to ask whether we'll defend it is about to find out that the answer was written before any of us were born. She took a breath. I'm going to signal that fleet in 10 minutes. And what I'm going to tell them is no. Not no, please reconsider. Not no, let's negotiate. Just no, the whole word with nothing behind it but us. If you want no part of that, say so now and I'll log it, and no one will ever hold it against you, because being willing to die is not the same as being ordered to, and I won't confuse the two. But if you're with me, hold your position, bring your weapons up, and let's go show 11,000 years of certainty what a line looks like from the wrong side. She closed the channel and waited, and the waiting was the longest 10 seconds of her life. Then Okonkwo said very quietly, "Ma'am, you'd better look at the board." She looked. The tactical display had been showing 17 ship markers in the loose, not above the pole. Now, one by one, as ships across her scattered little fleet brought their weapon systems online in answer, the markers were changing color, from the amber of standby to the hard white of a vessel cleared for action. 17 of them. Then, impossibly more. Because down on the planet, in the orbital shipyards that everyone in the Concordance survey had dismissed as agricultural infrastructure, things that had been logged as bulk freighters and mining tenders and atmosphere processors, were powering up reactors that no freighter had any business carrying. The line, it turned out, had been getting ready for a long time. And Elara Voss began to understand that she had told the Concordance the truth, without yet knowing the half of it. The thing the Concordance survey had gotten wrong about Meridian Reach was not a number. It was a category. They had catalogued the colony's industrial output accurately enough. They had counted the orbital shipyards, the ore refineries, the vast automated foundries that ringed the world's 2 moons, the fleets of bulk haulers that moved raw material from the asteroid belt to the smelters and finished goods back down to the surface. They had seen all of it. And they had filed all of it under a single heading, agriculture and resource extraction. Because in 11,000 years of Concordance history, a young frontier colony was a thing that grew food and dug metal and waited, gratefully, for the day the Empire arrived to relieve it of the burden of defending itself. What the survey had not understood was why humans built the way they built. Meridian Reach had been founded by people who left the Coreward world specifically because those worlds had, one after another, been absorbed by larger powers, not the Concordance, which had not yet reached this arm, but the smaller predatory empires that had come before it. The founders of Meridian Reach were the descendants of the absorbed. They carried, in their bones and their bedtime stories, the memory of what it was to build something and have it taken because you could not hold it. And so, when they crossed the dark and planted their spire and put up a plaque that said we came here to be no one's subject, they had made a decision that the concordance's survey xenologists had catalogued and utterly failed to comprehend. They had decided that everything they built would be able to fight. Not obviously, not provocatively. A frontier colony that built an obvious war fleet invited exactly the attention it could not survive. So instead they built dual purpose. The bulk hauler that moved ore from the belt had a hull braced to take stresses no cargo ship needed, and mounting points under its cladding that had never held a mining laser. The atmosphere processors that ringed the moons had power cores 3 times larger than atmosphere processing required, and the excess had to go somewhere, and it went into capacitor banks that no one on the survey had thought to ask about. The automated foundries could retool, on 11 hours' notice, from casting hull plate to casting something else entirely. Every schoolchild on Meridian Reach did a year of what the colony called continuity service, which the survey had logged as vocational agricultural training, and which was, in fact, the reason that 300 million civilians could crew a war fleet that officially did not exist. The founders had a name for the whole doctrine, and they did not write it down anywhere the survey could find it, because writing it down defeated the purpose. They called it the deep keel. A ship's keel is the part you never see, the spine down at the bottom that everything else is built on, the thing that lets the vessel take a blow without breaking its back. The deep keel of Meridian Reach was the buried certainty that when the day came, and the founders had always known a day would come, the colony would not have to build a defense in the panic of an arriving fleet. It would only have to reveal one. Elara Voss had grown up inside the deep keel without ever being told its name. She had done her continuity service at 16 on the moon foundries and been taught to run a casting line and, in the same summer, to route reactor power to a capacitor bank in an emergency, and no one had ever quite explained why an atmosphere processing intern needed to know the second thing. She had made commander at 27 and been briefed, finally, on the sealed contingency the colony government kept in a vault under the landing spire, and she had understood, reading it, that she had been standing on top of something enormous her entire life without knowing its shape. The sealed contingency had a name too. It was called Reveille, an old word, from an old human military tradition, meaning the call that wakes a sleeping force at the coldest hour before dawn. And the contingency specified, in language written 40 years earlier by founders now mostly dead, exactly what was to happen if a power arrived that could not be negotiated with and would not be deterred, and expected, above all, that Meridian Reach would fold. Reveille specified that it would not fold. And Reveille specified who could give the order, not a committee, not a distant council that would deliberate while the demonstration list acquired its 841st entry. The founders had understood that the moment the day came, there would be no time for deliberation, and that certainty had to be answered with certainty. So the order to execute Reveille belonged to whoever held fleet command at the moment of contact. One person, one decision. Made in the time it took an empire to grow impatient. At the moment of contact, fleet command belonged to Commander Elara Voss, 29 years old, 31 hours without sleep, standing on the bridge of the adamant dawn while the markers on her tactical display turned from amber to white and then began to multiply. She had not given the Reveille order yet. She had only asked her fleet whether they were with her and watched them answer. But down on the planet and out in the shadow of the moons, the deep keel had heard the question in her voice, and it had begun, of its own accord, to wake. Commander, Okonkwo's voice had changed. There was something under it now that had not been there before, and it took Elara a moment to recognize it because she had not expected to hear it on this particular day. It was hope held down hard so it could not run away with him. Fleet-wide contacts. I'm reading reactor spin-up across the shipyard belt. And the moon foundries. Ma'am, I'm reading hold on. He bent over his console. His hands moved fast. The freighters. The bulk haulers in the belt. Their power signatures just tripled. That's not a cargo profile. I've never seen a cargo ship do that. Because they were never cargo ships, Elara said quietly. She was looking at the contingency in her memory, the sealed pages she had read 2 years ago and told no one about, because that was part of the discipline of the thing. You carried it, and you did not speak of it until the day. Chief, how many contacts? Okonkwo did not answer for a long moment. When he did, his voice was careful, the way a man is careful when he is afraid to believe a good thing. I had 17, ma'am. I'm now reading the board still populating. I'm reading 61. No, 73. They're coming out of the belt shadow and up from the foundry docks. Ma'am, some of these are big. That hauler profile off the second moon, the one we always logged as an ore barge, it's massing out at half the tonnage of that dreadnought. Half. And it's got hardpoints coming live all down its spine. The bridge crew had stopped what they were doing. Rays had turned from the communication station. The whole small warm room had gone still, watching the tactical display fill with white markers that had, minutes ago, been the invisible furniture of an ordinary industrial colony. Elara understood then what the founders had done, and the scale of it and the patience of it took the breath out of her. They had built a fleet in plain sight over 40 years, and hidden it not by concealing the ships but by concealing their purpose. Every hauler, every processor, every foundry tender built to fight, waiting to be told it was time. The Concordance survey had flown through the middle of it, counting hulls, and had catalogued a war fleet as a farm, because it could not imagine a species that would spend 40 years, and its entire industrial base preparing for a fight it hoped would never come, on the strength of nothing but a plaque and a promise and a line. But that was exactly what the founders had understood about their own children. Humans did not calculate the cost of the line. They paid it, and if they were wise, they paid it early in the slow, patient coin of preparation, so that when the day came the bill would already be met. Chief, she said, total tonnage. Give me the whole picture, everything that just woke up against what's sitting above the pole. Okonkwo worked. The number came slowly, because the board was still filling, ships still rising from the foundry docks and coasting out of the belt shadow with their reactors screaming up to full power for the first time in their working lives. Against the dreadnought alone we're still outmassed, he said. That thing is a world unto itself, but against the rest of their fleet, the escorts, the cruisers, the support hulls, commander, we're not outnumbered anymore. We might be over, and we're in our own gravity well with our own supply lines, our own foundries that can build replacements faster than they can, and 300 million people who all just heard you say no. He looked up. His careful hope had gotten away from him at last. Ma'am, they came here expecting to accept a surrender. They did not come here expecting a war, and they definitely did not come here expecting to find out that the farm was a fortress the whole time. Elara looked at the board. 73 markers, 90, 104, the deep keel waking. She thought about the moment that was coming, the moment she signaled the dreadnought, and said the whole word with nothing behind it but a fleet that 11,000 years of certainty said could not exist. She thought about High Regent Vael Osorai, whoever he was, sitting up there in his receiving posture, waiting for a young colony to take off its coat and hand over the keys. And she thought, he is about to look at his tactical display, and he is about to see the same thing I am seeing, and for the first time in his very long life, the ceremony is going to go wrong. Rays, she said, open a channel to the dreadnought, their command frequency, the one the declaration came in on. Ray's hands hovered. Ma'am, you want to answer them. I want to give them the courtesy they gave us, Elara said. They told us plainly what they intended. I'm going to tell them plainly what we intend. That's how you do this when it's real. You don't ambush them with it. You warn them out loud with your whole chest so that whatever happens next, it happens because they chose it and not because they were surprised. She straightened. Her reflection hung faint in the dark viewport, a young woman against a horizon of steel. Chief, is Reveille fully awake? Reveille is awake, ma'am. Okonkwo's voice was steady now, the hope folded back down into resolve. Every hull's reporting green, weapons hot across the fleet. The foundries are already casting replacement munitions. The planetary defense grid is warm. If you give the word, we don't just refuse them. We can make them bleed for every hour they stay in our sky. Elara nodded slowly. Below her, on the equatorial plateau, her mother stood in a greenhouse with dirt on her hands and a radio on the potting bench, listening to a silence that had gone on too long, and understood, in the way that mothers understand things, that her daughter was about to do the bravest and most dangerous thing a person could do, which was tell the truth to something enormous. Open the channel, Elara said. Let's introduce ourselves properly. Aboard the undimmed Ascension, High Regent Vael Osorai was composing in his head the report he would file after the surrender. It would be a good report, it always was. He had a certain reputation among the staff colleges for the elegance of his surrender reports, the way he captured the particular character of each absorbed people, the small dignities he preserved for them in the language of the record, so that a species reading its own absorption 1,000 years later would find, if not comfort, then at least the sense that it had been seen. He was already drafting the phrase for the humans. A vigorous folk, he would write. Loud in their grief and quick in their loyalties, they came to the Concordance as the young come to any old and settled house, reluctantly, and then, once inside, as if they had always meant to. He was rather pleased with as if they had always meant to. He was turning it over, polishing it, when the second voice made a sound he had not heard in the better part of a century. It was a sound of confusion. Regent, said the second voice, the human industrial platforms, the freighters and processors we logged during approach, they are the four-armed officer stopped. Its arms had gone still, which in Adelith was the equivalent of a scream. Regent, their power signatures are inconsistent with their catalogued function, considerably inconsistent, and they are moving into formation. Vael set down the report in his mind. Explain formation. They are forming a line of battle, Regent. The second voice's voice had gone flat with the effort of saying something that doctrine did not permit. A competent one. And the count is still rising. We logged 17 defensive vessels. I am now tracking 131 active hulls. Some of them are capital mass. One is nearly half our own tonnage. Regent, the survey catalogued these as ore barges. For a long moment, High Regent Vael Osorai said nothing at all. He looked out through the great curved viewport at the blue-green world he had come to receive, and he watched, in the tactical overlay projected across the stars, a fleet assemble itself out of what his entire civilization had agreed was a farm. 81 surrenders. He had accepted 81 surrenders, and in every one of them there had been a moment, he knew it well, he had come to love it, in the way one loves a familiar liturgy, when the smaller thing understood that resistance was impossible and let go. He had watched 100 worlds' worth of fleets power down their weapons, one by one, the amber lights going dark, the ceremony completing itself. He was watching the opposite happen now, amber going to white, the lights coming on, not off. All across his display, a colony that was supposed to be taking off its coat was, instead, arming. Regent, said the second voice, very quietly into the silence. They are opening a channel to us. Vael Osorai, who had never in 800 years been made to wait in vain, who had one sentence from one filed paper drifting up now from the bottom of his very long memory. They do not calculate the cost of the line. They pay it, inclined his silver head toward the viewport, and toward the small blue world, and toward whatever was about to speak to him from it. "Then let us hear," he said, "what the farm has to say." There was a story the founders of Meridian Reach told their children, and it was not a story about a battle, because the founders had learned that battles were the wrong thing to teach the young to admire. It was a story about a door. The story went like this. On the Corward world that Elara's great-grandmother had fled, in the last generation before the flight, there had been a house at the edge of a mining town, and in the house lived a family, and the family had a door with a good lock, and the lock had cost more than the family could easily afford. When the small predatory empire that ruled that world sent its collectors around, the neighbors up and down the street opened their doors, because opening the door was easier and the collectors were polite about it, and everyone knew that the ones who did not open their doors were noticed. But the family with the good lock did not open their door, not because they had anything to hide behind it. They had less than the neighbors, if anything. They kept the door locked because the day they opened it to a knock they had not invited, it would stop being their door and start being a door the empire was allowed through, and a door the empire was allowed through was not a door at all. It was a formality, a hole in the wall with a hinge. The collectors came back, and each time the family did not open the door, and each time it cost them something, a fine, a mark against their name, a slow squeeze. And the neighbors, who had opened their doors and been left mostly alone, thought the family were fools, because the family were paying for the sake of a lock on a door that had nothing valuable behind it. But the founders, telling the story to their children on Meridian Reach, always stopped at that point and asked the same question: what was behind the door? And the answer the children learned to give was, the door. The thing behind the door was the door itself, the fact of it, the being able to keep it shut. There was nothing else the family was protecting because there did not need to be. The lock was not guarding the valuables. The lock was the valuable. And on the day the family finally left that world, crossed the dark, and helped found a colony where a plaque at the landing spire would say, "We came here to be no one's subject," they understood something their neighbors never had, that the neighbors, who had kept all their possessions by opening their doors, had lost the only possession that could not be replaced, and had lost it so quietly, so reasonably, so politely, that they never even felt it go. Elara had heard that story 100 times growing up. Every child on Meridian Reach had. It was the reason the colony felt, to the Concordance survey, so strangely obstinate about small things. The reason its trade agreements had clauses the survey found needlessly proud. The reason its people bristled at forms of courtesy that other young worlds accepted gladly. It was not obstinacy. It was the story of the door, worked so deep into the culture that the people living it no longer knew they were telling it. They only knew that some doors you did not open, no matter how polite the knock, because the opening was the whole of the loss. And it was the reason, Elara understood now, standing on her bridge while the deep keel woke around her world, that the founders had built a fleet inside a farm. They had not built it hoping to win a war. They had built it so that when the empire finally arrived and knocked politely, so politely, with medicine and peace and a seat at the table in its open hands, there would be a real lock on the door. Because a no spoken by a people who could not defend the door was only a delay, a formality, a hole in the wall with a hinge. But a no spoken by a people who could make the empire pay for coming through, that was a lock. That was a door that was still in the way that mattered, a door. She thought about High Regent Osorai's fleet, sitting up there in its receiving posture, its hands open, its knock so very polite. And she thought about the family with the good lock, paying for a door with nothing behind it but the door. And she understood that the founders had handed her, across 40 years, exactly the thing she needed, not a weapon to win with, but a lock good enough that her no would be a real no, and that the empire, when it heard it, would have to decide whether it was truly willing to break down the door. That, in the end, was what the deep keel was for. Not to defeat the Empire. To make the Empire choose with open eyes whether it was the kind of thing that broke down doors. And in making it choose, to give it the chance no one on the Coreward worlds had ever thought to give the small, polite empires that took them, one open door at a time, to discover that it was not. Raise, Elara said, coming back to herself, to the bridge, to the horizon of steel filling her display. Open a channel to the dreadnought. The lock was good. It was time to see whether the Empire, hearing it turn, would knock the door down anyway, or whether, for the first time in 11,000 years, it would stand at a threshold it had always walked through, and pause, and wonder what kind of thing it wanted to be. The channel opened, and across 7 light minutes and 11,000 years, a 29-year-old woman spoke to an empire that had never been told no. "High Regent," Elara said, and she had asked Raise to pull the Regent's name and rank from the Declaration's authentication header, because she had decided that if she was going to refuse a man, she would refuse him by name. "This is Commander Elara Voss of the Terran Colonial Defense Force, speaking for the world you call Meridian Reach. I've received your second declaration. I've read it in full, including the list. I want you to know that I understood it. I'm not confused about what you're offering or what you're threatening. I want to be sure of that before I answer, because I don't want you to think later that this happened because I didn't understand." Aboard the undimmed Ascension, Vael listened to the translation and found himself, against all expectation, leaning forward. The voice was young. He had accepted surrenders from the young before. They were usually the easiest, being closest to the fear. But there was something in this one he did not have a category for. It was not fear. It was not bravado either. He knew bravado, the brittle loud thing that broke at the first demonstration. This was something quieter and much harder, and it took him a moment to name it, and when he named it he did not like the name. It was calm. The woman was calm. Not the false calm of someone suppressing terror, but the deep calm of someone who has already been afraid, and finished being afraid, and come out the far side into a place where the fear no longer applies. "Commander Voss," he said, and his own voice went out serene and enormous and kind, the voice that had eased 81 peoples across the threshold. "I am gratified that you understood. It spares us both a great deal. You have seen the list, and so you know that I take no pleasure in it, and that I would vastly prefer to add your world to a different list, the far longer one of peoples who chose the Concordance and flourished within it. Your people are young. You have built impressively." He allowed himself the smallest generosity. "More impressively, I now see, than our survey credited. But you have surely done the arithmetic that your chief Okonkwo did, and you know that the vessel I speak to you from could unmake your fleet, and then your world, in less time than this conversation has taken. The privilege of citizenship is real, Commander, so is the alternative. Power down your weapons, and I will remember today as the day I welcomed a vigorous people. Do not, and I will remember it as something I regret. The choice, and I mean this sincerely, is entirely yours." There was a silence, and then the young voice came back, and it was still calm, and Vael Osorai understood, hearing the first word of it, that the ceremony was over and something else had begun. "No," Elara said. "Just the word." She let it stand by itself for a moment, the whole word, with nothing behind it but a fleet. "I want to be precise, High Regent, because you were precise with me. I'm not saying no as an opening move in a negotiation. I'm not saying no so that you'll offer better terms. There are no better terms, and I know it. I'm saying no the way you'd say it about a thing you will not do. My grandparents crossed the dark to get to a place where no one could arrive above their heads and instruct them to hand over the right to say no. There's a plaque at the base of our first landing spire. It says we came here to be no one's subject. I've walked past it my whole life. 300 million people down there have walked past it. And every one of us understood, walking past it, that the words meant nothing at all unless there was a day we'd be willing to defend them. You've brought us the day, High Regent. So here's our answer, and it's the same one that plaque has been giving for 40 years to anyone who cared to read it. No. Vael was quiet. On his flag deck, the second voice's 4 arms had folded in tight against its body, the posture of a being watching something it does not understand and cannot look away from. "Commander," Vael said at last, and there was something almost gentle in it now, almost sorrowful, "you have a fleet. I concede that. Our survey was in error, and I will see that the error is corrected, and I will note in my report that you concealed it with genuine skill. But a fleet, Commander, is not the same as a chance. You have perhaps 130 hulls. I have one vessel that outmasses all of them together, and 11,000 years of practice at using it. I do not want to add your moon to the list. I do not want to add your world to it. But you are asking me to believe that you would rather see 300 million people die on the far side of a line than live in freedom and comfort on the near side of it. And I have accepted 81 surrenders, Commander, and I am telling you from experience, no one chooses that. When the demonstration comes, they always step back. Always. You will step back. I would rather spare you the demonstration that teaches you so. Power down." And here, Elara Voss did the thing that Vael Osorai would think about for the rest of his very long life. She laughed, not cruelly, not with bravado. It was a small, tired human laugh, the laugh of someone who has just heard a very old and very powerful being say something that reveals, all at once, how little it actually understands. "High Regent," she said, "you keep telling me what people always do. 81 times, you said. 840 on the list. And I believe you. I believe every one of those peoples looked at the demonstration and did the arithmetic and stepped back, and I don't blame a single one of them because the arithmetic is real and stepping back kept their children alive." Her voice did not rise. It went, if anything, quieter and more certain. "But you've built your whole empire on a number, High Regent. 11,000 years and 100 worlds out of 100. And somewhere in all that time, you stopped noticing that it was a number and started thinking it was a law. You think everyone steps back is like everything falls down. It isn't. It's just a streak. A very long streak. And the thing about a streak is that it tells you exactly nothing about the next one, except that the next one is where it ends." She leaned toward the pickup, though he could not see her, and 300 million people heard the next part, and so did her mother, standing in a greenhouse with dirt on her hands. "You came here certain, High Regent. I could read it in how your fleet was sitting when you arrived. You didn't come braced for a fight. You came braced to accept a coat. And I need you to understand that your certainty is the most dangerous thing in this whole system, not your dreadnought, your certainty. Because it means you're going to keep waiting for us to do the thing everyone always does, right up until the moment you finally understand that we're not going to. And by then it's going to be too late for you to have made a different choice. So I'm making the choice easy. We are not going to step back, not at the demonstration, not after it, not ever. You can unmake a moon and we will not step back. You can unmake a city and the rest of us will not step back. There is no number you can reach on your list, High Regent, that gets us to yes, because the thing you're asking us to sell is the exact thing we crossed the dark to buy. Now you know. You can't say you weren't told." The channel closed on her side. She had said everything she meant to say, and she knew, the way you know you've set down a weight, that there was nothing left to add. On the flag deck of the undimmed Ascension, High Regent Vael Osorai sat very still and looked at the small blue world and felt something he had not felt in so long that it took him a while to recognize it. He was uncertain. "Regent," said the second voice into the silence that followed, "your orders." Vael did not answer immediately. This too was new. In 81 surrenders his orders had never once needed thought. The ceremony supplied them. But the ceremony had broken, and in its absence he found himself doing something he had not done in centuries, which was actually consider. He considered the woman, Commander Voss. Young, he could hear the youth in the voice, and yet not young in the way that mattered, because the thing that made the young easy to break was that they still believed the world owed them a future, and this one had plainly stopped believing that and started building one instead. He considered her laugh. It kept coming back to him, that laugh, the small, tired human sound of it. He had expected many reactions to the demonstration list. He had not expected to be laughed at, gently, by someone who was not wrong. Because she was not wrong. That was the thing that had lodged itself under his ancient composure like a splinter. She was not wrong about the streak. He had never thought of it as a streak. He had thought of it as a law, everyone steps back, and he had built 840 demonstrations on the certainty of it, and it had never once occurred to him, in all his long life, to ask what would happen the day the law turned out to have been a streak the whole time. Run the projection, he said. A full engagement. Their fleet as it now stands in their own gravity well against our full force. Give me the true numbers, not the ceremonial ones. The second voice hesitated. Regent, doctrine holds that against a demonstration. The demonstration is what I am questioning, Vael said, and his voice was still serene, but there was iron surfacing under the serenity now, the iron of a being who has ruled for 800 years precisely because he could, when he had to, look directly at a thing he did not want to see. Run it. The projection took 4 minutes. Vael watched it build across the tactical display, his fleet and the human fleet, the vectors and the tonnages and the attrition curves, the cold arithmetic of what would actually happen if the ceremony became a battle. It was not the arithmetic he had expected. The dreadnought would win. Of that there was no question. The undimmed ascension could not be destroyed by the force arrayed against it, not in a day, perhaps not in a month. But the projection was not a question of whether the dreadnought would win. It was a question of what winning would cost, and the cost, laid out in the cold light of the display, was staggering. The humans were in their own gravity well. Their foundries could replace losses faster than his supply lines could. Their capital mass haulers, the ones the survey had called ore barges, massed enough to trade blows with his escorts and his cruisers, and the humans did not fight the way the projection's default assumptions expected. The tactical model kept flagging their behavior as irrational, because it assumed that a fleet would preserve itself, and the human fleet, the model warned, showed every sign of a force that would not. They do not calculate the cost of the line, they pay it. If he pressed the attack, the projection said, he would win, and he would lose 2/3 of his escort fleet, half his cruisers. And this was the part that made the flag deck go silent, a not negligible probability of critical damage to the undimmed ascension herself, because 130 desperate ships in a gravity well, fighting with no intention of surviving, could do things to even an 11-kilometer dreadnought that 130 rational ships never would. And when it was over, he would have unmade a world, 300 million dead, a ruin where a colony had been. And he would carry that ruin coreward as his 82nd acquisition, and it would not be an acquisition at all, because there would be nothing left to acquire, only a graveyard and the report he would have to file, and the sentence he would have to write in it, which would not be as if they had always meant to. It would be a sentence he did not have. A sentence for a people who had chosen, in full knowledge, extinction over subjection, and made him pay for it in a coin he had never spent before. Regent, said the second voice softly, the projection assumes they will not break, if the demonstration causes them to break, as demonstrations always. You heard her, Vael said. You heard the same words I did. Do you believe they will break? The second voice was silent for a long moment. Its 4 arms, which had been folded tight against its body, unfolded slowly, the gesture of a being setting down a certainty it can no longer hold. No, Regent, it said. I do not believe they will break, I believe her. Vael Osorai looked out at the small blue world, at the fleet that had risen from its farms, at the horizon of steel that a 29-year-old woman had assembled out of 40 years of patience, and a plaque a meter high. And he understood that he had arrived at Meridian Reach to perform a ceremony, and that the ceremony had died the moment the amber lights turned white, and that he now stood at a place he had not stood in 800 years, a genuine fork, with no doctrine to tell him which way to turn, because doctrine had assumed this fork did not exist. He could order the attack. He would win, at a cost that would break his fleet and stain his name and add nothing to the concordance but a grave. Or he could do the thing that no High Regent had done in the entire history of the Empire, because no High Regent had ever been made to. He could wait and think, and consider that perhaps 11,000 years of 100 worlds out of 100 had not been a law after all, but a streak, and that the woman on the small blue world had just told him, plainly and by name and with her whole chest, that the streak ended here. "Second voice," he said, "signal the fleet to hold, all weapons cold, no vessel is to advance." The four-armed officer stared at him. "Regent, to hold is to concede the initiative, if they interpret it as weakness." "They will not interpret it as weakness," Vael said, and for the first time in a very long time he felt the strange vertigo of learning something. "They will interpret it as exactly what it is, a being that came here certain, discovering in front of them that it was wrong, signal the fleet to hold, and open a channel to Commander Voss. I find that I am not finished speaking with her." The channel reopened, and Elara Voss braced for the demonstration. She had expected it from the moment she closed the channel. She had told her fleet to expect it. The doctrine was clear, laid out in the Concordance's own list. When a world refused, the Empire unmade a moon and let the world watch, and waited for the refusal to collapse into compliance. She had already given the orders for what would come after, the defense grid warm, the foundries casting, the fleet dispersed enough that a single strike could not gut them. She had told her mother, in a brief private channel she was not proud of and did not regret, to get to the deep shelter under the plateau and to stay there no matter what she heard. She had done everything a commander could do to prepare for the demonstration. She had not prepared for the High Regent to open the channel and say, in that vast, serene, sorrowful voice, "Commander Voss, I am going to ask you a question, and I would like you to answer it as honestly as you answered everything else, because I find that I have come to rely on your honesty in the last few minutes more than I have relied on anything in a very long time. Will that be acceptable?" Elara glanced at Okonkwo. He gave a small, baffled shrug. This was not in the list either. "Ask," she said. "When I ran the projection of a full engagement," Vael said, "my tactical models flagged your fleet's expected behavior as irrational, repeatedly, because the models assume that a force, when it begins to lose, will act to preserve itself. Yours would not. The models could not account for it, and so they called it irrational, which is what models call the things they cannot account for." A pause. "I do not think it is irrational, Commander. I think there is a logic to it that my empire has simply never encountered, because in 11,000 years no one has stayed on the far side of the line long enough for us to see it. So I am asking you plainly so that I may understand before I choose. What is it that you are actually defending down there? Not the plaque, not the words on it. The thing the words point at. What is it worth 300 million lives to you?" And Elara Voss, 29 years old, 32 hours without sleep, standing on the bridge of a frigate above the only world she had ever loved, understood that the High Regent was not trying to trick her. He was actually asking. Something had happened up there on the dreadnought in the minutes since she'd said no, and the enormous certain thing that had come to take her world had cracked open just far enough to let a question out. So she answered it truthfully, because truth had gotten her this far. "You want to know why we won't sell it," she said. "I'll tell you, but you have to understand the frame first, because I don't think your empire has the frame. You think of it as a transaction. We give up the right to say no, and in exchange we get peace and medicine and a seat at your table. And on paper that's a good trade, I'll admit it, High Regent, on paper it's a very good trade. Better than most of what history offers. If it were only about outcomes, we'd take it. My mother would have better tools. My people would live longer. On paper, yes. She looked out at the horizon of his ship. But it isn't about outcomes. That's the thing your models can't hold, and I think it's the thing 11,000 years taught you to stop seeing. There's a difference between a good thing you chose and a good thing that was chosen for you, and the difference isn't in the thing. It's in you. A people that hands over the right to say no doesn't just lose a right. It loses the part of itself that the right was protecting, the part that gets to look at the whole universe and decide freely what it will and won't accept. You give us everything, High Regent, and take only that. And you call it a small price because from where you sit it looks small. But it's not small. It's the whole thing. It's the exact thing we cross the dark to be able to keep. Everything else, the medicine, the peace, the seat at your table, every bit of that is worthless to us the second it comes with, and you don't get to say no. Because the saying no is what makes all the rest ours instead of yours. The bridge was silent. Even rays had stopped pretending to work. You asked what it's worth 300 million lives, Elara went on, and her voice had gone very quiet and very steady. Here's the honest answer, High Regent, and it's going to sound insane to you, because your whole civilization is built on it sounding insane. It's worth all of them. Not because we don't love our lives, we love them fiercely, more than I think your long-lived people even can, because we've got so few years and we know it. But a life spent as someone's subject, on the near side of a line we swore to defend, isn't the life we'd be saving. It's a different life, a smaller one, and the people who'd be living it wouldn't be us. They'd be what was left after the part that mattered got sold. My grandparents already watched that happen to the worlds they came from. They crossed the dark specifically so their grandchildren would never have to make the trade they'd been forced to make. And I'll be damned, High Regent, I'll be unmade, moon by moon and city by city, before I'm the generation that sells back the exact thing they bled to buy. She stopped, she had said it. All of it, the true whole shape of it, laid out for an empire to look at. That's the frame, she said. That's what your models are calling irrational. It's not irrational. It's just yours versus ours, and you've spent 11,000 years only ever meeting people for whom it was about outcomes and mistaking that for a law of nature. We're not about outcomes, High Regent. We never have been. And that's not a threat. It's just what we are. You wanted to understand before you chose. Now you understand, choose. High Regent Vael Osorai closed his silver eyes. For 800 years he had believed himself the servant of the most humane arrangement power had ever devised, and he had not been wrong to believe it, because the arrangement was humane. It had ended plagues and famines and the small vicious wars of 1,000 young species, and it had done so at a price that 99 of every 100 worlds had judged, freely and with open eyes, to be worth paying. He did not repent of the Concordance. He would not. It had done more good than any empire in the history of the galaxy, and the woman on the small blue world had all but conceded as much. On paper, a very good trade. But he understood now, standing at the fork that doctrine said did not exist, that he had spent 800 years mistaking the 99 for the 100. He had believed everyone stepped back because everyone he had ever met had stepped back, and he had never once let himself imagine the 100th, the world for whom the trade was not a trade at all but a surrender of the self, because imagining it would have meant admitting that the arrangement he served had a limit, a place it could not reach, a line it could not cross without becoming the exact thing it claimed to have replaced. The humans were the 100th. Not because they were stronger, they were not nor wiser, nor better, but because they had understood something about themselves early enough to build their whole world around defending it, and had then spent 40 patient years making sure that, when the empire arrived, it would find not a farm but a fortress, and behind the fortress not a bluff but a people who meant every word. He could still order the attack. He turned the thought over one last time, honestly, the way she had taught him in the last few minutes to turn things over. He would win, and the winning would cost him 2/3 of his fleet and the integrity of his flagship and 300 million lives, and the one thing his 800 years had actually been for, the belief that the Concordance was the humane choice. Because there was nothing humane in unmaking a world that had done him no harm, that had only refused to sell him the one thing it could not sell, that had told him plainly and by name exactly what it was, and asked him only to choose with open eyes. If he pressed the attack now, knowing all of that, then the arrangement he served would have become a lie in the very moment he defended it. The Concordance would no longer be the empire that absorbed the willing. It would be the empire that murdered the unwilling and called it mercy. And Vael Osorai, who had written 81 surrender reports with his whole heart, discovered that he would rather resign his commission than write the 82nd. He opened his eyes. "Commander Voss," he said, "I am going to tell you what is going to happen, and then I am going to do it so that you will know I am not maneuvering. Are you listening?" "I'm listening," Elara said. Her hand had drifted to the console near the command that would order her fleet to fire the moment the demonstration came. She did not move it away. Not yet. "I came here certain," Vael said. "You saw it in how my fleet was arranged, and you were right to see it, and you were right about what it was. I came here to accept a coat. I have accepted 81 of them, and I have loved the accepting because I still believe, that the house I was welcoming people into was a good house. But I built my certainty on a number, Commander, exactly as you said. 100 worlds out of 100. And I mistook the number for a law, and I have just now in front of you discovered that it was a streak. You were the end of it. You are the 100th world, the one my empire spent 11,000 years never letting itself imagine, and you are teaching me at the age of 840 years, the difference between a thing everyone does and a thing that must be so." He drew a breath, vast and slow. "I find that I do not have it in me to unmake you for teaching me. And more than that, I find that if I did, I would unmake the thing I have served my whole life along with you, because an empire that murders the world that will not sell its soul is no longer the humane arrangement. It is only the old horror wearing the arrangement's face." Elara did not move. On the tactical display, the Concordance fleet held its position, weapons cold, exactly as it had since he'd given the order. She had been waiting for the trick. She kept waiting. "So here is what is going to happen," Vael said. "I am going to withdraw my fleet to the system edge. Not because you defeated me, you did not, Commander. Had I been willing to pay the price, I would have won, and we both know it. I am withdrawing because I have looked at the price, and I have decided that I am not willing to pay it, and that decision is mine, freely made, exactly as your refusal was yours. You will note that I am giving you the same thing you would not sell me, the right to say no. Because it turns out, Commander Voss, that once a being has truly seen that right in someone else, seen it defended with a whole world's life, without flinching, by someone young enough to be my descendant 100 times over, it becomes very difficult to go on pretending it was ever mine to take." And then on the tactical display, before Elara Voss could answer, before she could even fully believe it, the impossible thing began to happen. The dreadnought moved, not inward toward the demonstration, outward, and behind it, one by one, the escorts and the cruisers and the great 11,000-year-old machine of the ceremony turned and began, in the silent language of vectors, to leave. For a long moment, nobody on the bridge of the adamant dawn breathed. Elara watched the vectors on her display and did not trust them. She had spent 32 hours preparing to die well, and the preparation had gone all the way down into her, into the muscle and the marrow, and it did not let go easily. She kept her hand near the firing command. She watched for the trick, the moment the withdrawal turned out to be a maneuver, the dreadnought coming about to bring its main batteries to bear, the demonstration arriving from an unexpected angle. She had read the list. 840 times, refusal had ended one way. She could not yet believe she was watching it end another. "Chief," she said quietly, "tell me what I'm looking at, slowly, don't guess." Okonkwo worked his console, and she could hear him fighting the same disbelief. "There." "Withdrawing, ma'am, all of them, the dreadnoughts leading. Weapons cold across their whole fleet, no charge signatures, no targeting locks, nothing. Their vectors clean for the system edge. This isn't a repositioning. There's no attack geometry in it. Ma'am, they're leaving. He looked up and his broad, quiet face had come apart into something raw. They're actually leaving. Keep the fleet at station, Elara said. Her voice was steady, but her hand had not left the console. Weapons hot. If this is a feint, I want us ready the second it turns. Nobody stands down until that dreadnought is past the edge and in transit. Nobody. Ray's, is the channel still open? Still open, ma'am. Ray's voice was thick. He's still there, the Regent, he's just waiting. Elara understood then what he was waiting for. He had told her what he was going to do, and then he had done it, so that she would know he was not maneuvering. And now he was holding the channel open, unarmed, his fleet in retreat, giving her the last word, because the last word was hers to give. He had spent 11,000 years of accumulated certainty, and he had chosen to spend it here, and he wanted her to know it was a choice and not a defeat. She took her hand off the console. High Regent Osorai, she said, I see your fleet withdrawing, I see your weapons cold, and I want to say something to you, and I want you to hear it the way I mean it because I think you're owed it. She paused. I was ready for the demonstration. I had my orders written. I told my mother to go into the shelter. I had made my peace with what refusing you was going to cost, and I want you to understand that I would have paid it, every ship, every hour, 300 million lives, all of it, and I would have done it without stepping back, because that's what the line means, and I told you the truth about what we are. So I'm not thanking you for sparing us. We didn't ask to be spared. We asked to be free, and those aren't the same thing, and I think you already know that. Her voice softened just slightly. But I am going to tell you that in 11,000 years, you are the first one who looked at us and actually saw us. 81 surrenders, and I don't think a single one of those peoples ever got to find out whether you'd have chosen differently, because they never made you choose. We made you choose, and you chose to leave a world alive that you could have unmade. That's not weakness, High Regent, and it's not defeat. That's the bravest thing I've watched anyone do today, and I include myself in that. It's a lot harder to give up a certainty you've carried for 800 years than it is to defend a plaque you were raised on. There was a silence on the channel, and then Vael Osorai's vast, slow, serene voice came back one last time, and there was something in it Elara had not heard before, something that in a shorter-lived being she would have called wonder. Commander Voss, he said, I have accepted 81 surrenders in my life, and I have been proud of every one of them, and I will tell you now that not one of them taught me anything. You have refused me, and it is the most important thing that has ever happened to me. I am going to carry your world's name forward, and I am going to file a report, and the report is not going to be about an acquisition. It is going to be about a limit. About the place the arrangement cannot reach, and must not reach, if it wishes to go on deserving the name it gives itself. There will be those on the Corward councils who will call it heresy. Let them. I'm 840 years old, Commander, and I have just now, above your small blue world, been taught by someone a fraction of my age the one thing my whole long life never managed to teach me, that there is a difference between a people you have welcomed and a people you have broken, and that an empire which cannot tell the difference has already lost the thing that made it worth building. A pause, vast and slow. Live free, Commander Voss. You have earned the words on your plaque. See that your grandchildren earn them too. It is harder to keep a line than to defend one, and you will find, I think, that the keeping is the whole of the work. And then the channel closed, and on the tactical display, the undimmed Ascension crossed the system edge and folded into transit, and the 11,000-year-old machine of the ceremony was gone, taking its list with it. And above Meridian Reach, there was nothing left but 131 human ships and a young commander who had told an empire no and been believed. It was quiet on the bridge for a long time. The kind of quiet that comes not from nothing happening, but from too much having happened all at once, to people who had braced for the end of everything and been handed, instead, the whole rest of their lives. Reyes was crying openly and not trying to hide it, and nobody minded. Okonkwo sat back in his chair and put his face in his hands and let out a breath that seemed to have been held for 32 hours. Somewhere in the fleet, on 130 other bridges, the same thing was happening. The slow, disbelieving, overwhelming recognition that they were alive, that their world was alive, that the sky above their children was going to keep being their own. And down on the equatorial plateau, in a greenhouse full of early tomatoes, a woman with dirt on her hands came up out of the deep shelter when the all-clear finally sounded, and she stood in the doorway of her greenhouse in the ordinary evening light, and she looked up at a sky that an empire had come to take and had, instead, left free. She did not know all of what had happened up there. She would learn it later, in the days when the story spread across the colony and then, more slowly, across the human worlds, and then, more slowly still, in strange half-legends, across the whole galaxy. The story of the young commander who told the Concordance no and made it stick. She only knew, standing in her doorway, that her daughter's voice had come out of the radio calm and unafraid, and had spoken for 300 million people, and that the sky was still theirs. Elara Voss stood at the center of her bridge and looked at the empty place on the display where the horizon of steel had been, and she found that her legs did not entirely want to hold her, now that they no longer had to. Rear Admiral Cho's medical transport was still 6 hours out. In 6 hours she would hand back the fleet, and the weight, and the chair, and become again a commander of one frigate among many, 29 years old and due, frankly, for about 2 days of sleep. But for these 6 hours, and for the rest of a life that had almost ended today and had not, she would carry the knowledge of what she had learned in the highest and coldest hour, when the defense of a world had belonged to her alone. She had learned that an empire's certainty was the most dangerous and the most fragile thing in any sky, dangerous because it never braced for the answer it had never been given, and fragile because it had never once, in 11,000 years, been made to check whether it was true. She had learned that a line was not a wall you hid behind but a place you stood in the open, with your whole chest, and told the truth about who you were, and let the truth do the work that no weapon could. And she had learned that the founders had been right, all those years ago, to build a farm that was a fortress, not because the fortress won the day, but because the fortress was what let her tell the truth without the truth being a bluff. You could not stand on a line you had no way to defend. You could only kneel on it and call it standing. The deep keel had given her a real place to stand. And from that place, a 29-year-old woman had looked up at 11,000 years of 100 worlds out of 100, and had become the 101st, and the first, all at once. "Chief," she said at last, and her voice was very tired and very steady, "stand the fleet down to alert readiness. Keep a picket at the edge for a week. I trust him, but I don't trust everyone on his councils, and he as much as told me not to. Get the foundries back to casting hull plate instead of munitions, and send a signal to the surface, to the whole planet." "What do you want it to say, ma'am?" Elara Voss looked out through the dark viewport at the small blue-green world hanging in the empty sky, 90 years young, 300 million alive, free by an act of will that had cost, in the end, not a single life, because the will had been real enough that it never had to. "Tell them the sky is still ours," she said. "Tell them we were asked to sell the one thing we came here to keep, and we said no, and we were believed. And tell them to go read the plaque at the landing spire tonight, all of them, everyone they can get to it, because the founders wrote those words 40 years ago hoping this day would never come, and it came, and the words held." She allowed herself, at last, the smallest and most human of smiles. "Tell them the words held. And tell my mother the tomatoes can wait one more day. I'm coming home to see them before they're gone." And on the equatorial plateau, in the ordinary evening light, under a sky that was still and would remain her own, a woman with dirt on her hands heard the message come through, and looked up, and understood that her daughter was coming home, and that an empire had learned, above a small blue world, the one thing 11,000 years had never taught it, that there are peoples who do not calculate the cost of the line. They pay it, and in paying it without flinching, in front of something vast enough to destroy them, they change the course of things that were certain a moment before and were never certain again.